Hi, this is Paul. Over the last year of talking about Jordan Peterson, I've noted a lot of interesting biblical comparisons to Jordan Peterson. Jonathan Peugeot likened him to Cyrus, the pagan king who ushered the exiles back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. I've likened him to John the Baptist in some ways, but this morning, as I was thinking about it, I think I have the best biblical comparison to him as yet. Jordan Peterson is the unauthorized exorcist. That's who I think Jordan Peterson really is in terms of how he's acting, how he's functioning in our current context. Now, I get this from Mark 9. Teacher, said John, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we told him to stop because he was not one of us. Do not stop him, Jesus said, for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. Truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward. Now, is Jordan Peterson not driving out demons? So when you go to, if you stay for the VIP sessions after his evangelistic crusade, he will greet 150 or so people. And actually, in this picture over here on the left is my friend James, who I did a conversation with. James and I both watched these folks go through and were simply amazed at how he could pay attention to each one. And I sat close enough, you can see where I'm sitting, where I could overhear tidbits of the conversation between people, and person after person come up to Jordan Peterson and say, you saved my life, you changed my life, you rescued me. He's Jack from Titanic. And that actually came up at our meetup. And you'd think, well, how is he doing this? Well, why is he doing this? Is he not casting out demons? Yes, he's casting out demons. And that's why people are coming around and he's doing miracles. And now you might say, well, no, Pastor, those aren't the kinds of miracles we're talking about. Well, at the end of this video, you might not be so sure. He is doing miracles, and that's why he got my attention, because when I saw him filling that concert hall in Toronto, I thought, that's a miracle. I know some really fine preachers in Toronto with empty seats in their chairs. The numbers of people following him, the people getting interested in Christianity. I used to think that going the way of Sam Harris was a one-way street, but he's bringing them back towards the church from that direction. And I look at that as nothing short of miraculous. We say, well, but that's not, okay. Hold off on the miracle stuff. We're going to get into C.S. Lewis's miracles a little bit, and I hope that you see what I mean. You see, our cultural definition, and therefore, if you listen to what Jordan Peterson says, therefore, what we see, our cultural definition is that miracles are a violation of nature. I would actually assert that technology is often more of a violation of nature. It's a colonization of nature. It's an oppression of nature. It's a use of force against nature to do what nature does not want to do. Now, sometimes this is benevolent, sometimes it is malevolent, but it's almost always with consequence. Miracles are something different. Our technology project is trying to impose our will upon nature, some of it good, some of it bad. And think about breaking horses. We make them submit. They're less wild, and there are always unintended consequences of this. And actually, C.S. Lewis gets into this a little bit in his book on miracles, which we're going to look at. If you look at Brett Weinstein's little video that I played in my last video from Rebel Wisdom, this is exactly what he says. He says, I can transcend my assassin robot program and decide not to do it. But as I pointed out in the last video, it's far more complicated than just deciding not to do it. Now, you've seen this box quite a bit as I've been developing my videos lately. And this is exactly the point of materialism or nihilism. That because I've actually started watching I want to say Verkijk, because that's kind of the Dutch pronunciation, but he has Buddhism and cognitive science, and I'm watching some of those videos. He also teaches at U of T, and there's some really interesting stuff in those videos. But apart from story, you can't discern purpose, because in the context of a story, things have purpose, because stories have ends. They have eschatology. They have teleology. Stories show what things are for. Now, you can look at reason from above, empiricism from below. You can look at the past, but many in the secular box cannot find purpose because there's no story and there's no purpose. You might say, well, what causes, and so I'm going to be talking to Struan, my South African friend today, and he says I don't have to be coy about his name, and I want him to be blogging more and writing more, and maybe now mentioning him in my videos. But, what is the purpose of this hat? What is the cause of this hat? Well, it came out of a factory. But okay, that's where the hat comes from. But why is it made? Well, it's made to cover my balding head so that the top of my head doesn't turn to paper in the hot California sun. So you need the story in order to actually have purpose. Otherwise, things are without purpose. And so if you look at Alex Rosenberg, who says there is no purpose, there is no meaning. Sam Harris tries to get meaning, and he smuggles in the Christian story in order to get his idea of love in search of well-being, or maybe, reason in search of love. But he's just smuggling in Christianity, and he doesn't want to. In that sense, he's sort of a thief. He wants to run away with the goods, but not pay for them. Now, C.S. Lewis in The Grand Miracle, which is a chapter in his book on miracles, and it's a standalone essay in some of his other essays, really nails this, because he says the story of Jesus, his incarnation, his life, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and his ascension, this is the missing piece within our story that makes sense of the whole story. So I'll play a little bit of that C.S. Lewis doodle, and you can see.
Supposing you had before you a manuscript of some great work, either a symphony or a novel. There then comes to you a person saying, "Here is a new bit of the manuscript that I found. It is the central passage of that symphony, or the central chapter of that novel. The text is incomplete without it. I have got the missing passage, which is really the center of the whole work. The only thing you could do would be to put this new piece of the manuscript in that central position, and then see how it reacted on the whole of the rest of the work."
In other words, the way to judge the revelation, I would call it, that comes in the middle, because you've got general and special revelation, Belgic Confession, 2 books. The way to judge that revelation is to see how well it makes sense of the whole story.
If it constantly brought out new meanings for the whole of the rest of the work, if it made you notice
brought out new meanings. This is essentially what Jordan Peterson says he discovers with the Bible, that it keeps going deeper. It's bottomless.
Things in the rest of the work which you had not noticed before, then I think you would decide that it was authentic. On the other hand, if it failed to do that, then, however attractive it was in itself, you would reject it. Now, what is the missing chapter in this case? The chapter which Christians are offering. The story of the Incarnation is the story of a descent and resurrection. When I say resurrection here, I am not referring simply to the first few hours or the first few weeks of the resurrection.
Now notice, whenever Jordan Peterson is asked about the resurrection, that's what the focus is, okay? And now C.S. Lewis is going to correct that.
I am talking of this whole huge pattern of descent, down, down, and then up again. What we ordinarily call the resurrection being just, so to speak, the point at which it turns. Think what that descent is. The coming down, not only into humanity, but into those 9 months which precede human birth, in which, they tell us, we all recapitulate strange, pre-human, subhuman forms of life, and going lower still into being a corpse, a thing which, if this ascending movement had not begun, would presently have passed out of the organic altogether, and have gone back to the inorganic, as all corpses do. One has a picture of someone going right down and dredging the sea bottom. One has a picture of a strong man trying to lift a very big, complicated burden. He stoops down and gets himself right under it so that he himself disappears. And then he straightens his back and moves off with the whole thing swaying on his shoulders. Or else one has the picture of a diver, stripping off garment after garment, making himself naked, then flashing for a moment in the air, and then down through the green and warm and sunlit water into the pitch-black cold freezing water, down into the mud and slime, and then up again, his lungs almost bursting, back again to the green and warm and sunlit water, and then at last out into the sunshine, holding in his hand the dripping thing he went down to get. This thing is human nature, but associated with it all nature, the new universe. And now, as soon as you have thought of this pattern of the huge dive down to the bottom, into the depths of the universe and coming up again into the light, everyone will see at once how that is imitated and echoed by the principles of the natural world. The descent of the seed into the soil, and its rising again in the plants. There are also all sorts of things in our own spiritual life where a thing has to be killed and broken in order that it may then become bright and strong and splendid. The analogy is obvious. In that sense, the doctrine fits in very well. So well, in fact, that immediately there comes the suspicion. Is it not fitting in a great deal too well? In other words, does not the Christian story show this pattern of descent and reascent because that is part of all the nature religions of the world? We have read about it in the Golden Bough. We all know about Adonis and the stories of the rest of those rather tedious people. Is not this one more instance of the same thing, the dying God? Well, yes, it is. That is what makes the question subtle. What the anthropological critic of Christianity is always saying is perfectly true. Christ is a figure of that sort. And here comes a very curious thing. When I first, after childhood, read the Gospels, I was full of that stuff about the dying God, the Golden Bough, and so on. It was to me then a very poetic and mysterious and quickening idea. And when I turn to the Gospels, never will I forget my disappointment and repulsion at finding hardly anything about it at all. The metaphor of the seed dropping into the ground in this connection occurs, I think, twice in the New Testament. And for the rest, hardly any notice is taken. It seemed to me extraordinary. You had a dying God who was always representative of the corn. You see him holding the corn, that is, bread, in his hand, and saying, "This is my body." And from my point of view, as I then was, he did not seem to realize what he was saying. Surely there, if anywhere, this connection between the Christian story and the corn must have come out. The whole context is crying out for it. But everything goes on as if the principal actor, and still more those about him, were totally ignorant of what they were doing. It is as if you got very good evidence concerning the sea serpent, but the men who brought this good evidence seem never to have heard of sea serpents. Or, to put it another way, why was it that the only case of the dying God, which might conceivably have been historical, occurred among a people, and the only people in the whole Mediterranean world, who had not got any trace of this nature religion, and indeed seemed to know nothing about it? Why is it among them the thing suddenly appears to happen? The principal actor, humanly speaking, hardly seems to know of the repercussions his words and sufferings would have in any pagan mind. Well, that is almost inexplicable, except on one hypothesis. How if the Corn King is not mentioned in that book because he is here of whom the Corn King was an image? How if the representation is absent because here at last the thing represented is present? If the shadows are absent because the thing of which they were shadows is here? The corn itself is in its far-off way an imitation of the supernatural reality, the thing dying and coming to life again, descending and reascending beyond all nature. The principle is there in nature because it was first there in God himself. And thus one is getting in behind the nature religions, and behind nature to someone who is not explained by, but explains, not indeed the nature religions directly, but that whole characteristic behavior of nature on which nature religions were based. Well, that is one way in which it surprised me. It seemed to fit in a very peculiar way, showing me something about nature more fully than I had seen it before, while itself remaining quite outside and above the nature religions.
So here Lewis basically says that you can understand basically the two stories fit together, general revelation and special revelation, because of style, because of how they work together. Now, in the Christian story, nature rebels against her rightful master because her rightful master rebelled against his. Now, the gender here is not accidental, and that gets into a traditional, again, Peterson's good on this, a traditional understanding of masculinity and femininity. Now, it's not. Now, the difficulty that we have in our current context is on one hand, we understand the dislocation of male from masculine and female from feminine, but we don't, we both are at the same time too disconnected and not disconnected enough. And that's part of the reason we're stumbling on these things when it comes to both church and out in the world. But now look at the miracles of Jesus. The thing that C.S. Lewis points out in his book Miracles is that the fitness of the Christian miracles and their difference from these mythological miracles lies in the fact that they show the invasion of a power, capital P, which is not alien. They are what might be expected to happen when she is invaded not simply by a God, but by the God, capital G, of nature, capital N, by a power, capital P, which is outside her jurisdiction, not as a foreigner, but as a sovereign. Now, again, this is part of the mastery of Lewis's writing, because that distinction in terms of an invasion, not by a foreigner, not by some alien race that comes in. See, what we do with technology is invade it like a foreigner. We need to break it to make it our slave. But the sovereign comes and nature submits freely and willingly because it's her sovereign. Okay, so notice that distinction in Lewis. And Lewis's writing is full. He almost always picks just the right word, which is why so often I can read and reread and reread and reread Lewis's work again and again and again. And I can listen to Peterson's work multiple times and continue to gain benefit from it. That's not just because I'm slow, okay? I am not the smartest man in the world. I know this. I regularly talk to people far smarter than myself. I'm slow to pick up things. I'm slow to see things. And so what that means is often I have to listen to things again and again and again and again. And one of the interesting things about the Peterson community out there, and you know, the man who gave me this, he says he's listened to everything 4, 5, 6 times. And I believe it because I've done the same things. Because when I listen again, I understand the distinctions. And I have that same thing with Lewis. They proclaim that he who has come is not merely a king, but the king, capital K, her king and ours. Notice how nature is feminine. It is this which, to my mind, puts the Christian miracles in a different class from most other miracles. Now, Lewis, again, was an expert in classics. I do not think that it is the duty of Christian apologists, as many skeptics suppose, to disprove all stories of the miraculous which fall outside of the Christian records, nor of any Christian man to disbelieve them. And he talks about that, and I'm going to skip some of these elements. This is the chapter in C.S. Lewis's book Miracles on miracles of the old creation. The miracles of Jesus can be classified in 2 ways. The first system yields the classes: miracles of fertility, miracles of healing, miracles of destruction, miracles of dominion over the inorganic, on and on. And I'm going to let the Audible book pick up the reading, because the reading is better than I do. Well, let's see. Let's get rid of this window. Okay.
Organic. 5 miracles of reversal. 6 miracles of perfecting or glorification. The second system, which cuts across the first, yields 2 classes only. They are 1, miracles of the old creation, and 2, miracles of the new creation. I contend that in all these miracles alike, the incarnate God does suddenly and locally something that God has done or will do in general. Each miracle writes for us in small letters something that God has already written or will write in letters almost too large to be noticed across the whole canvas of nature. They focus at a particular point, either God's actual or his future operations on the universe. When they reproduce operations we have already seen on the larger scale, they are miracles of the old creation. When they focus those which are still to come, they are miracles of the new. Not one of them is isolated or anomalous. Each carries the signature of the God whom we know through conscience and from nature. Their authenticity is attested by the style. Before going any further, I should say that I do not propose to raise the question, which has before now been asked, whether Christ was able to do these things only because he was God, or also because he was perfect man. For it is a possible view that if man had never fallen, all men would have been able to do the like. It is one of the glories of Christianity that we can say of this question, it doesn't matter. Whatever may have been the powers of unfallen man, it appears that those of redeemed man will be almost unlimited. Christ, reascending from his great dive, is bringing up human nature with him. Where he goes, it goes too. It will be made like him. If in his miracles he is not acting as the old man might have done before his fall, then he is acting as the new man every new man will do after his redemption. When humanity, borne on his shoulders, passes with him up from the cold dark water into the green warm water and out at last into the sunlight and the air, it also will be bright and coloured. Another way of expressing the real character of the miracles would be to say that though isolated from other actions, they are not isolated in either of the two ways we are apt to suppose. They are not, on the one hand, isolated from other divine acts. They do close and small, and as it were in focus, what God at other times does so large that men do not attend to it. Neither are they isolated exactly as we suppose from other human acts. They anticipate powers which all men will have when they also are sons of God and enter into that glorious liberty. Christ's isolation is not that of a prodigy, but of a pioneer.
Again, that's just a classic case of Lewis having exactly the right word. Christ is not a prodigy. He's not a special case. He's a pioneer.
Pioneer. He is the first of his kind. He will not be the last. Let us return to our classification, and firstly to miracles of fertility. The earliest of these was the conversion of water into wine at the wedding feast in Cana. This miracle proclaims that the God of all wine is present. The vine is one of the blessings sent by Yahweh. He is the reality behind the false god Bacchus. Every year, as part of the natural order, God makes wine. He does so by creating a vegetable organism that can turn water, soil, and sunlight into a juice which will, under proper conditions, become wine. Thus, in a certain sense, he constantly turns water into wine. For wine, like all drinks, is but water modified.
Now, it's interesting that in Isaiah 5, there's this wonderful parable about the vineyard. And this parable about the vineyard becomes the story of Israel. But it's the story of humanity, and it's the story of glory. It's the story of our relationship and our role within the creation, our role as it should be. But also there in wine, you find all of the drama of our story within creation. We can make glory, but then we can't handle glory.
Once, and in 1 year only, God, now incarnate, short-circuits the process, makes wine in a moment, uses earthenware jars instead of vegetable fibers to hold the water, but uses them to do what he is always doing. The miracle consists in the short cut, but the event to which it leads is the usual one. If the thing happened, then we know that what has come into nature is no anti-natural spirit, no God who loves tragedy and tears and fasting for their own sake, however he may permit or demand them for special purposes, but the God of Israel who has through all these centuries given us wine to gladden the heart of man.
Now, I'm going to play a little bit more of this, but what I want us to see are the miracles of Jordan Peterson, okay? What are the miracles of Jordan Peterson? Well, as you might have noticed, I do a lot of videos with people on my channel for whom Jordan Peterson has improved their life. Now you might say, well, is that a miracle? Well, it's kind of like water to wine in the natural sense. It's, as C.S. Lewis says, the letters are written so large and so huge, we don't see them as a miracle. And in a sense, it happens so slowly, we don't see it as a miracle. And what you often find in the Bible with the miracles of Jesus is that things are sped up. And so water to wine happens in a moment, but it's happens in a moment in a special way, that which happens over a long period of time in a normal course. When Jordan Peterson, using the Tao, admonishes people to clean up their room and straighten out their life, well, that is the large, lettered, huge miracle that is so regular, and that God number one, is so deeply at work at. It's happening all the time. And that's why what's happening with Jordan Peterson, I look at it and say, that's a miracle. Other people say, but the laws of nature weren't violated. I say, oh no, we violate the laws of nature all the time, and we pay the price for it. We violate the laws of nature when, well, when we use technology that allows us to maybe fly through the air at thousands of miles an hour, but do damage to nature in another way. So in other words, we make nature pay the price for our dominion and our greed. And what Jordan Peterson is doing, and we'll get to this in a minute, is he is helping people get in line with the Tao, get in line with this, and when they do this, suddenly they discover their lives are better. Well, why are their lives better? Is it miraculous? Yeah, it's miraculous in the same way that Gallo or any kind of vineyard that is all over Northern California. Almost can't drive anywhere, not drive into a vineyard here in Northern California now. It's in that way that water becomes wine all over the place. You say, well, that isn't a miracle. Oh, well, depends at what speed. Now we get into the monarchical vision and time. Well, it's in this matter of time that miracles and, let's call them anti-miracles, the rape of nature, takes place.
Other miracles that fall in this class are the two instances of miraculous feeding. They involve the multiplication of a little bread and a little fish into much bread and much fish. Once in the desert, Satan had tempted him to make bread of stones. He refused the suggestion. The Son does nothing except what he sees the Father do. Perhaps one may without boldness surmise that the direct change from stone to bread appeared to the Son to be not quite in the hereditary style.
That is such an amazing observation by Lewis, and I've never heard anybody see the passage in that way as Lewis sees, because what Lewis sees is that not only he goes deeply into, and this I think is where Jonathan Pageau and some of this symbolic awareness has been really helpful for me in terms of exegesis. Stones to bread is a violation where bread to bread is not, because, as Lewis says, in the hereditary style. And this is why Lewis is just a master with language.
Style. A little bread into much bread is quite a different matter. Every year God makes a little corn into much corn. The seed.
Now pay attention. In England, corn means grain. In America, corn means that yellow thing on a stalk that we use for fuel and cow feed and sweet corn. So that threw me off for a few years when I'd hear all these English scholars talking about corn from Egypt. Oh, they meant wheat from Egypt and grain from Egypt, because in English, corn means grain.
The seed is sown and there is an increase. And men say, according to their several fashions, it is the laws of nature, or it is Ceres, it is Adonis, it is the corn king. But the laws of nature are only a pattern. Nothing will come of them unless they can, so to speak, take over the universe as a going concern.
The laws of nature are a pattern. Again, Lewis, I dealt with this early on when I was going through miracles. what are the laws of nature? It's a pattern we see. And we say, well, there are the laws. And we say, well, miracles violate the laws. And what Lewis is saying is, no, miracles don't violate the laws. Miracles are nature doing as the lawgiver demands.
In concern. And as for Adonis, no man can tell us where he died or when he rose again. Here at the feeding of the 5,000 is he whom we have ignorantly worshipped, the real corn king who will die once and rise once at Jerusalem during the term of office of Pontius Pilate. That same day he also multiplied fish. Look down into every bay and almost every river. This swarming, undulating fecundity shows he is still at work, thronging the seas with spawn innumerable.
God number one.
Innumerable. The ancients had a god called Genius, the god of animal and human fertility, the patron of gynecology, embryology, and the marriage bed. The genial bed, as they called it after its god, Genius. But Genius is only another mask for the God of Israel, for it was he who at the beginning commanded all species to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And now, that day, at the feeding of the thousands, incarnate God does the same, does close and small, under his human hands, a workman's hands, what he has always been doing in the seas, the lakes, and the little brooks. With this we
Now, the point that also Lewis makes is that what have we done with our colonization of nature, breaking her, making her bow to our will? You see, the dominion that is talked about in Genesis 1 is very different from the dominion we are using in technology to destroy the earth. The dominion we are using in technology to destroy the earth is anti-nature. And we try to, we make nature a slave. We cheer ourselves in our abolition of slavery, but we practice it with our technology all the time, and we make nature our slave. And I think that's part of the reason we make nature so impersonal, because once we make it impersonal, then we can enslave it with a clean conscience. But oh no, we wouldn't enslave a person. You see, and you can see our hypocrisies and our selfishness is just manifest in these things. Now he's going to get into the virgin birth.
We stand on the threshold of that miracle which for some reason proves hardest of all for the modern mind to accept. I can understand the man who denies miracles altogether, but what is one to make of people who will believe other miracles and draw the line at the virgin birth? Is it that for all their lip service to the laws of nature, there is only one natural process in which they really believe? Or is it that they think they see in this miracle a slur upon sexual intercourse, though they might just as well see in the feeding of the 5,000 an insult to bakers?
And again, the genius of Lewis to recognize that relationship is just amazing.
And that sexual intercourse is the one thing still venerated in this unvenerating age. In reality, the miracle is no less and no more surprising than any others. Perhaps the best way to approach it is from the remark I saw in one of the most archaic of our anti-God papers. The remark was that Christians believed in a God who had committed adultery with the wife of a Jewish carpenter. The writer was probably merely letting off steam and did not really think that God, in the Christian story, had assumed human form and lain with a mortal woman, as Zeus lay with Alcmene. But if one had to answer this person, one would have to say that if you called the miraculous conception divine adultery, you would be driven to find a similar divine adultery in the conception of every child, nay, of every animal too. I am sorry to use expressions which will offend pious ears, but I do not know how else to make my point. In a normal act of generation, the father has no creative function. A microscopic particle of matter from his body and a microscopic particle from the woman's body meet, and with that there passes the color of his hair and the hanging lower lip of her grandfather, and the form of humanity in all its complexity of bones, sinews, nerves, liver, and heart, and the form of those pre-human organisms which the embryo will recapitulate in the womb. Behind every spermatozoon lies the whole history of the universe. Locked within it lies no inconsiderable part of the world's future. The weight or drive behind it is the momentum of the whole interlocked event which we call nature up to date. And we know now that the laws of nature cannot supply that momentum. If we believe that God created nature, that momentum comes from him. The human father is merely an instrument, a carrier, often an unwilling carrier, always simply the last in a long line of carriers, a line that stretches back far beyond his ancestors into pre-human and pre-organic deserts of time, back to the creation of matter itself. That line is in God's hand. It is the instrument by which he normally creates a man, for he is the reality behind both genius and Venus. No woman ever conceived a child, no mare a foal, without him. But once, and for a special purpose, he dispensed with that long line which is his instrument. Once his life-giving finger touched a woman without passing through the ages of interlocked events. Once the great glove of nature was taken off his hand. His naked hand touched her. There was, of course, a unique reason for it. That time he was creating not simply a man, but the man who was to be himself, was creating man anew, was beginning at this divine and human point, the new creation of all things. The whole soiled and weary universe quivered at this direct injection of essential life, direct, uncontaminated, not drained through all the crowded history of nature. But it would be out of place here to explore the religious significance of the miracle. We are here concerned with it simply as miracle, that and nothing more. As far as concerns the creation of Christ's human nature, the grand miracle whereby his divine begotten nature enters into it is another matter. The miraculous conception is one more witness that here is nature's Lord. He is doing now, small and close, what he does in a different fashion for every woman who conceives. He does it this time without a line of human ancestors. But even where he uses human ancestors, it is not the less he who gives life. The bed is barren where that great third-party genius is not present.
And so what you see here from Lewis is, again, his mastery and noting that, well, and we use this language all the time, people will be there at the birth of their child and they will testify that this is a miracle. Now, what do they mean? Why do they call the birth of a child a miracle? Why do they call the growing of their infant child a miracle? More than one person who has been turned by Jordan Peterson has told me, yeah, I used to think that more in the nihilistic line, but then I had a child and I looked at that child and I knew I would give my life for that child. That child is a miracle. Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that that child violates the laws of nature? No, that child is the epitome of nature's crown. And so what is a miracle? Well, in water to wine, the virgin birth is what is usually in such large letters we don't recognize the miraculous, even though sometimes we do and call them a miracle. It's sped up and it's brought down and it's brought right there for a special purpose, just in that moment. And what we'll see in the miracles of Jesus, that his miracles were always to testify to the whole thing. Because when there are ears that can't hear, nature has been violated. And so what he does is restore those ears to hearing, and they restore those eyes to seeing. This morning I was just kind of paging through the Gospel of Mark, which if you want to read a gospel and you want to read a short one, read the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is almost entirely miracle stories. Matthew and Luke have more talking. John has lots of talking, but Mark is almost miracle stories. And you'd wonder, the tradition says that Mark is the preaching of Peter. Why would so much of his story be miracle stories, miracle stories, miracle stories? And with our warped sense of nature, we think, well, that's just to try and give Jesus credentials. It's way, way more than that. It's because the credential itself bears what the message is, which is the renovation, the recreation, the perfection, the renewal of all creation and of nature. That's what the story is about. So when those who can't speak, when the dumb speak, it's nature fulfilled. And when the lame leap like a deer, you can read this in Matthew 35 and Isaiah 35. This is the renewal, the perfection, the correction, and the ultimate pointing to the new creation. That's what Christianity is about. And that's why Jesus' miracles have the shape they have. And we can see this most clearly in healing.
Present. The miracles of healing, to which I turn next, are now in a peculiar position. Men are ready to admit that many of them happened, but are inclined to deny that they were miraculous. The symptoms of very many diseases can be aped by hysteria, and hysteria can often be cured by suggestion.
Now, if you go back and look at my conversation with Topher, this is part of the point that Topher was making. Topher was saying, placebo often is seen to work as well, if not better, than the actual drugs we get people. We don't know the power of the mind. And what Lewis is saying here is that some of the miracles we may see in the Bible might be of that sort. Because again, the miracle, the tiny little instance, and now notice what Lewis does with size here. He says, so turning water to wine is a small thing. Well, why would that be small? That seems huge to us. No, it's a quick and small thing, but what it is a window into the water to wine that is happening in countless wineries in Northern California. It's just sped up. Well, why is it sped up? Well, could it be that Jesus is the story of the universe sped up so that we can see it small because we're small and we're quick-lived? That this entire miracle, well, what would you call such a thing? Revelation. Revelation is that which is so true, but our eyes are so dim, or we are so small, we lack the perspective to see it. So revelation is the big story brought down into miniature so that we can see it. It's the same thing as when you give a child a little manger scene to play with. And I was talking with a friend who was trying to get his mind wrapped around some certain issues of working in a church, and I said, when you give your toddler a tiny little cow, and you give it, and it's made of soft plastic so they can chew it because they're going to put them in their mouth, and then they're going to teeth it, and they might play with their little Noah's Ark set with the little cow. Well, that little cow is something that is brought down and brought small so that the toddler can see it and connect with it. But it is by no means a cow in all its glory. When I was a little boy, so the Dutch are very often into dairy, so I was brought into one of my mother's cousins' dairy farm, and my parents noted that as maybe a 4-year-old, I was brought into the gallery that was full of cows, and I just stood back, and I didn't want to go by those cows. Well, why not? Because they're large and they're powerful, and they looked at me with their big eyes, and they were full of glory, they were full of majesty, they were full of power. And I, as a little boy, would prefer the tiny little cow I could play with. Well, in a sense, that's what the miracles are. That they're the glory of God brought low and brought small. And God, Jesus, in a sense, says, this is mine. I'm going to show it to you in the small, tiny form so that you can know not only it, but you can know that its master, that its master's name is love.
It could no doubt be argued that each suggestion is a spiritual power, and therefore, if you like, a supernatural power, and that all instances of faith healing are therefore miracles. But in our terminology, they would be miraculous only in the same sense in which every instance of human reason is miraculous. And what we are now looking for is miracles other than that. My own view is that it would be unreasonable to ask a person who has not yet embraced Christianity in its entirety to allow that all the healings mentioned in the Gospels were miraculous, that is, that they go beyond the possibilities of human suggestions. It is for the doctors to decide as regards each particular case, supposing that the narratives are sufficiently detailed to allow even probable diagnosis. We have here a good example to what was said in an earlier chapter. So far from belief in miracles depending upon ignorance of natural law, we are here finding for ourselves that ignorance of law makes miracle unascertainable. Without deciding in detail which of the healings must, apart from acceptance of the Christian faith, be regarded...
I shouldn't let that go by. So in believing in miracles depends upon ignorance of natural law. And see, this is where I'm putting it together with Peterson. Because what Peterson is doing with the Tao, what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao in the Abolition of Man that we've been going through. What Lewis does in the Tao is he encourages people to get their lives back into natural law. Well, what happens when you get your life back into natural law? Well, life gets better. And in a sense, what many people have been trying to do is make wine, but they don't know how to make wine. And so they take grape juice and then they think, well, I'll add this to grape juice and that will make wine. It's like, no. People go to college to learn the natural law of winemaking. See, we often think these things are antithetical, and part of the problem is that in the West, in the long span of history, certain elements of the church began to imagine that, well, they basically became Manichaean. That somehow God and nature were against each other. No, nature is in rebellion, but nature is in rebellion against us. Nature's not, and nature is in rebellion against us because we are in rebellion against God. And so when God comes as the sovereign of nature, nature bows. The winds and the waves obey him because they recognize their sovereign. But when we come to nature and try to determine, try to enforce our sovereignty, well, we have to use power in a different way in order to break nature, because great nature will not bow to us because we are in rebellion to nature's master.
Faith be regarded as miraculous to decide as regards each particular case, supposing that the narratives are sufficiently detailed to allow even probable diagnosis. We have here a good example to what was said in an earlier chapter. So far from belief in miracles depending upon ignorance of natural law, we are here finding for ourselves that ignorance of law makes miracle unascertainable.
Which is why, in a sense, the celebrity atheists who try to wield the Tao but can't recognize it, can't see miracles. They might say, oh yeah, the birth of a child is a miracle. Great, okay, you're seeing something. Terrific. So why do you have a problem with the virgin birth? Well, because you don't believe in God number 2 or God number 1.
Without deciding in detail which of the healings must, apart from acceptance of the Christian faith, be regarded as miraculous, we can, however, indicate the kind of miracle involved. Its character can easily be obscured by the somewhat magical view which many people still take of ordinary and medical healing. There is a sense in which no doctor ever heals. The doctors themselves would be the first to admit this. The magic is not in the medicine, but in the patient's body, in the vis medicatrix naturae, the recuperative or self-corrective energy of nature. What the treatment does is to simulate natural functions or to remove what hinders them. We speak, for convenience, of the doctor or the dressing healing a cut, but in another sense every cut heals itself. No cut can be healed in a corpse. That same mysterious force which we call gravitational when it steers the planets and biochemical when it heals a live body is the efficient cause of all recoveries. And that energy...
Notice a little bit of Aristotle there, 4 causes.
And that energy proceeds from God in the first instance. All who are cured by him, not merely in the sense that his providence provides them with medical assistance and wholesome environments, but also in the sense that their very tissues are repaired by the far-descended energy which, flowing from him, energizes the whole system of nature. But once he did it visibly to the sick in Palestine, a man meeting with men. What in its general operations we refer to laws of nature, or once referred to Apollo or Aesculapius, thus reveals itself. The power that always was behind all healings puts on a face and hands. Hence, of course, the apparent chanciness of the miracles. It is idle to complain that he heals those whom he happens to meet, not those whom he doesn't. To be a man means to be in one place and not in another. The world which would not know him as present everywhere was saved by his becoming local. Christ's single miracle of destruction, the withering of the fig tree, has proved troublesome to some people, but I think its significance is plain enough. The miracle is an acted parable, a symbol of God's sentence on all that is fruitless, and especially, no doubt, on the official Judaism of that age.
Now, as we're going to see, many of Jesus' miracles are just simply that. They're acted parables. He's revealing that which is often written in letters so large we can't see them to be letters, but he's revealing himself to be the author of those letters.
Judaism of that age. That is its moral significance. As a miracle, it again does in focus, repeats small and close, what God does constantly and throughout nature. We have seen in the previous chapter how God, twisting Satan's weapon out of his hand, had become, since the fall, the God even of human death. But much more, and perhaps ever since the creation, he has been the God of the death of organisms. In both cases, though in somewhat different ways, he is the God of death because he is the God of life, the God of human death because through it increase of life now comes, the God of merely organic death because death is part of the very mode by which organic life spreads itself out in time and yet remains new. A forest 1,000 years deep is still collectively alive because some trees are dying and others are growing up. His human face, turned with negation in its eyes upon that one fig tree, did once what his unincarnate action does to all trees. No tree died that year in Palestine, or any year anywhere, except because God did, or rather ceased to do, something to it.
Might see a little bit of Calvinism in that line.
All the miracles which we have considered so far are miracles of the old creation. In all of them we see the divine man focusing for us what the God of nature has already done on a larger scale. In our next class, the miracles of dominion over the inorganic, we find some that are of the old creation and some that are of the new. When Christ stills the storm, he does what God has often done before. God made nature such that there would be both storms and calms. In that way all storms, except those that are still going on at this moment, have been stilled by God. It is unphilosophical, if you have once accepted the grand miracle, to reject the stilling of the storm. There is really no difficulty about adapting the weather conditions of the rest of the world to this one miraculous calm. I myself can still a storm in a room by shutting the window. Nature must make the best she can of it. And to do her justice, she makes no trouble at all. The whole system, far from being thrown out of gear, which is what some nervous people seem to think a miracle would do, digests the new situation as easily as an elephant digests a drop of water. She is, as I have said before, an accomplished hostess. But when Christ walks on the water, we have a miracle of the new creation. God had not made the old nature, the world before the incarnation, of such a kind that water would support a human body. This miracle is the foretaste of a nature that is still in the future. The new creation is just breaking in. For a moment it looks as if it were going to spread. For a moment 2 men are living in that new world. St. Peter also walks on the water a pace or two, then his trust fails him and he sinks. He is back in old nature. That momentary glimpse was a snowdrop of a miracle. The snowdrops show that we have turned the corner of the year. Summer is coming. But it is a long way off, and the snowdrops do not last long. The miracles of reversal all belong to the new creation. It is a miracle of reversal when the dead are raised. Old nature knows nothing of this process. It involves playing backwards a film that we have always seen played forwards. The 1 or 2 instances of it in the Gospels are early flowers, what we call spring flowers, because they are prophetic, although they really bloom while it is still winter. And the miracles of perfecting, or of glory, the transfiguration, the resurrection, and the ascension are even more emphatically of the new creation. These are the true spring, or even the summer of the world's new year. The captain, the forerunner, is already in May or June, though his followers on earth are still living in the frosts and east winds of old nature, for spring comes slowly up this way. None of the miracles of the new creation can be considered apart from the resurrection and ascension, and that will require another chapter.
So go ahead and read chapter 16 of Lewis if you want to hear that chapter. Now Jordan Peterson comes along and says, start keeping the rules of traditional morality and your life will get better. And this is why he's hated by some. This traditional morality he discovers in the Tao, as seen not just in Christianity, but Jordan Peterson sees that as its pinnacle. Similar to, notice how Lewis treats Jesus and Bacchus and Apollos and all the other old myths. Lewis sees Jesus as the true myth, because we have all these other old myths, but when did Osiris live? But we know when Jesus lived. And so Jesus comes in as the story that makes all the previous stories intelligible, and that even those who are living far from God in these other stories, they could discern some of these elements of stories in very Petersonian ways from the old creation. They could hear its whispers and they could figure it out, but in Jesus they begin to see the thing itself. You have to, and Peterson comes along and says, you have to do it or it doesn't work. It is costly, but less costly than not doing it. Pay attention to how often Peterson comes along and says, no, I do it because no one gets away with anything, and I fear what not doing it will be. Peterson is working natural theology. He's coming up from the bottom along with all the other pagans. In this sense, Peterson is the new pagan, but the new pagan who finally sees the light. And we'll get into Peterson's difficulties in breaking through with that light yet. Results can be miraculous. Nothing short of miraculous, people say. Again, they come down to Peterson, they line up, and they come to hear him talk, and they come to give him gifts. They're little magi coming to the OMG VIP picture-taking event. And they say, here, Jordan, have this gift because you have saved my life. This is what we see happening. Why do we use that word? It's the best word to use, which is why we keep using it. It's the right one. Results are aligned with the story. So Peterson comes along, and these tiny bits of the story, that which you can do at home. Do you want a little miracle? Clean your room. It's a tiny little thing, but it is the miracle writ large of getting in line with the Tao. Clean your room. It's miraculous. It's also sacramental. Notice that here in Miracles, Lewis notes God taking off the glove. Well, what is the glove? The glove is nature. This is God number one. Matthew 15. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up to the mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. Well, what's he doing healing them? He is embodying. These are miracles of the old creation. He is saying legs were made, purpose. Legs were made to run and leap and dance. Grapes were made for wine. Well, you say, well, Sam Harris can't say grapes were made for wine. Sam Harris says, oh, we took grapes and we made wine out of them. But with that disposition, you both take away the glory and then also make yourself subject to the power of the glory that you cannot master. And that is any alcoholic. Because the glory is in the wine. But we're twisted. And we want the glory, but we want it in our own way. It's Golem in the ring. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the little logos coming out of our mouths. The crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel, because here he was, that the big letters, right down, small size, like the little toy that the toddler can take and see its glory in a safe way. Jesus left there. This is from Mark, and this is a story I told, and has actually caused quite a bit of study. And this also coming out of my conversation with Topher. Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did the man get these things?" they asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Remember, they just kept using the same names at that time. So these aren't the disciples. "Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Ponder that line, because there's so much in there that tells us why we resent God. It is envy. We want the power. We in hoping to make God small, we want to make ourselves seem relatively large. But God cannot be diminished. Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." He could not do any miracles there. See, this is where my quote was incorrect. Except lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And right there, so what miracles couldn't he do in the town? Well, in a sense, the kingdom couldn't come because they keep making God small so they can make themselves large, which is exactly what we do in modernity. Which is exactly what we do with the miracles of God. We, in moments of weakness, will let slip the miracle of childbirth and the miracle of children, but denying God the credit for all of this in the large letters and the small. Well, why couldn't he do miracles there? They didn't want to walk in to his kingdom. There's just a few people who were so desperate that they would open the door to him. And he healed them. But for the rest, no, they don't want his kingdom, and they surely don't want him. Not if he's going to become something other than the way they diminish him. Let's look at this clip again. And again, I've listened to so much Jordan Peterson again and again and again, and listening to it, I hear more. Now listen to this clip in light of the whole conversation that we've been having. Now this is on
okay.
Jordan Peterson started a clip channel, 75,000 subscribers, which I would be thrilled with. But for Jordan Peterson, it's small potatoes because he hasn't really worked his clip channel, because when everyone was making clips, he started making his own clips to try have the authorized edited version of Jordan Peterson. But even this, only 89,000. This is one of the most important clips of Peterson. Now listen to this clip in light of the conversation we've just been having about miracles and Jordan Peterson as exorcist.
Quick question, are you a Christian?
I suppose the most straightforward answer to that is yes, although I think it's let's leave it at yes.
Well, there's...
I love it. 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 It is just too much fun. And again, a bunch of us get wistful about, remember Jordan when he didn't have a good mic. Remember Jordan when he wore his suspenders and his Northern Alberta cowboy boots, when he didn't dress up for his videos, and when he could have unguarded moments. Well, yes. No. Resurrection? Why not? Listen carefully.
I'm a bit dissatisfied with that, because there are so many kinds of Christians, and
Well,
I would never imagine that you were a very literal-minded Christian.
Well, there are truths other than the literal that perhaps are more truthful than even literal truths.
Boy, we're still working hard through those issues, aren't we?
No, there are many kinds of truth, and I don't mean that in a postmodern way, actually. But the truths that govern behavior and the truths that emerge from facts are not the same truths.
First page of Maps of Meaning, and go to Node in a Network. He'll tell you about it. He'll tell you what, one page at a time every Monday in Maps of Meaning from Mr. Node. I love it. The world as form for action, the world as place of objects.
But you don't. Do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead?
Ah, the resurrection. Why do we keep coming back to this statement? Now, again, pay attention to, go back and listen to the C.S. Lewis doodle on the grand miracle. Read the next chapter in Miracles where Lewis talks about the resurrection, where Lewis makes the point that the story of the resurrection does not involve just that moment. That's the turning of the page. It's what's on the page. And this Peterson hasn't quite figured out yet, because in a sense, those who are coming to him, having followed the Tao, those who are coming to him now testifying to the miraculous change in their life, well, that's the miracle writ large. That's water to wine in every Gallo winery, and every winery, and I don't want to, Gallo, how about an endorsement? I miss Freddie. I miss Freddie so much. But how about this is what happens. This is where we can see water to wine, but because it's slow and we participate, we're comfortable imagining God is not there, even God number one.
Literally.
I find it, I cannot answer that question. And the reason is because, okay, let me think about it for a minute, see if I can come up with a reasonable answer to that.
We're going to keep doing this again and again and again.
Well, the first answer would be, it depends on what you mean by Jesus.
Jesus, Christ. Read the Apostle Paul and who Christ is and compare it to Jesus in the Gospels, because that relationship is not insignificant.
A historical human being that existed
in a body. And
in a body.
In a body.
Not a Gnostic.
Physical body, and that it was on earth.
Yes.
Yes.
That it was on earth, and that was literally came back to life.
Look at what's behind Tim Lott here. You've got beasts fighting, and you've probably got a grandchild playing with a little rubber duck. Glory. Why would you capture this moment in art and hang it on your wall? It's haunted by glory.
After death.
I would say that at the moment I'm agnostic about that issue, which is a lot different than saying I don't believe that it happened.
That's very
I
interesting.
can't explain why. When I get to the New Testament in my biblical lectures,
Jordan, when I get to the New Testament in my biblical lectures, we're waiting until November 2019 for freaking Exodus. Do you know how much stuff is in the Old Testament? You're going to go, oh.
I'll spend like 6 hours trying to explain what I think about that. But
no, you won't spend 6. You'll need a lot more.
One of the things I have come to learn over the last 15 years in particular is that the world is a very, very strange place. It's far stranger than we think. And what we don't understand about consciousness and its relationship with the body would fill many books. And you could say the same thing about our relationship with time and perhaps corporality and vulnerability and death for that matter. So I don't understand the structure of being well enough to make my way through the complexities of the resurrection story. I would say it's the most mysterious element of the biblical stories to me, and perhaps I'm not alone in that. I mean, it's the central drama in the Christian corpus.
It's the central drama in the Christian corpus. It's the chapter that makes the rest of the book make sense.
But I don't believe that it's reasonable to boil it down to something like, do you believe that or do you not believe it? You know, it's not, it's I don't know what the limits. I don't know the limits of human possibility.
That's such an interesting answer, because the miracles that he does are about applying the Tao and helping people to apply the Tao and seeing the transformations that take place. That's his entire mission. That is what he is doing out there with all of his evangelistic talks that he calls a book tour. And he hears the testimonies of people as they line up to them. So he is doing miracles in people's lives, and he sees how even just the small application of the Tao of cleaning up your room can in fact begin to set into motion a life transformed. You clean up your room, and bit by bit by bit by bit, the miracle moves out and takes over into life. And he sees that. He doesn't know how far that can go. Could it be that the Tao, coming as the Logos, starts into motion a path by which the entire cosmos is redone? That is the Christian story. And he sees it, and he dares, well, and I would say, Jordan, shake off the shackles of our age, for Pete's sake. Get rid of the chronological snobbery. Be gone with that stuff. Let it go. I appreciate how difficult it is to let these things go. And I think of Gandalf, freeing Theoden from the shackles of Saruman. Peterson is an exorcist. You're exorcising people right and left. Be exorcised yourself. Let's get back to the unauthorized exodus of the Gospel of Mark. Who might that unauthorized exorcist have been? Someone discovered that Jesus' name worked. Well, why did it work? Well, is it magic? No, it's not magic, because magic is violation of nature. It's sovereignty. This is God, the invader, as foreigner, or not as foreigner, but as sovereign. Why would God honor unauthorized checks? Well, I think God does this a lot. Read Luke 16 and the parable of the crooked servant. I was just meeting with the coffee break ladies, and they had that parable last week, and they're trying to put their minds around it. And I've spoken about this parable before, and then I get letters back. Reading Kenneth Bailey, I think Kenneth Bailey has the best take on it. Where there's this crooked steward in Luke 16 who rips off his master even more. And why would his master honor him? Because he trusted in the mercy and the goodness of the master more than his own. He knew he had no righteousness himself. And so he said, I can't save myself. I need a righteousness greater than myself to free me, because I have nothing. That's the first step in a 12-step program, right there. The parable of the steward in Luke 16. Go ahead. It's like a koan. Try and wrap your head around that, and look up Kenneth Bailey's look up Kenneth Bailey's treatment of it, because I think that's the best. But why would God honor unauthorized exorcists like Jordan Peterson? And this is what frustrates people within the church like me, and people, no, Jordan Peterson. God is doing a work, and Jordan Peterson is an exorcist, but he himself is not yet fully exorcised. Might be coming. God is God. We are not. He is. I was listening to Andrew Klavan on the Ben Shapiro show. After that aired, like 3 people within a couple of hours sent me an email and said, you have to listen to that video. And so now I'm going through Klavan's memoir, and it's a beautiful book. I'm really enjoying it. But God is using Peterson. He's an exorcist, and he's casting out demons out of men and women all over the world. And they're coming out into greater light. They're working the Tao, and they're discovering natural law, and they're discovering that reality has a shape, and if they in fact get in line with that shape, they can do better. But where I go with Peterson is you can only clean your room up to a point, and at some point, this is where the evidentialists, the John Lennox, and then the fideists, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky come into play and say, you can clean up your room enough, natural theology will get you so high, but at some point, you just have to receive God's grace. You just have to receive the gift. You just have to open yourself up and say, okay, I can't build my Tower of Babel to the heavens. And if doing so, I imagine I will supplant you. You will confuse the languages and take apart my initiative every time. So what I must do is leap. What I must do is surrender. What I must do is open myself wholly and fully to you. Read Pascal's research the note that Pascal lined into his pocket that they found after his death. Read, I think it was Dwight Moody. Was it Moody? It was one of those, it might not have been Moody, but when God comes upon us and we just have to yield to him, and then sometimes we beg him to go easy on us. That is how good he is. So, Jesus didn't show up to the Apostle Paul before the stoning of Stephen. It was on the road to Damascus. I'm a Calvinist. God does what he wants. He comes in and blows apart our little world, or we make subtle progress. He gives us the little chewy cow toy for the toddler, and we chew on it for decades of our life until finally we see the cow in all its glory. So what will God do with Peterson? I don't know, but it sure is fun watching. So the unauthorized evangelist somehow discovered Jesus' name worked, and God is not picky about who or what he uses. God is sovereign. He does what he wants, and this is exactly who Jordan Peterson is. So, yeah, who is Jordan Peterson? Understand what a miracle is. He is the unauthorized exorcist out of Mark 4, and the disciples look around and say, should we have him stop? And Jesus says, do not stop him, Jesus said. For no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. Truly I tell you, anyone who gives a cup of water, and that's such a low bar, just a cup of water, in my name, because you belong to the Messiah, will certainly not lose their reward. Jordan Peterson won't lose his reward.